Resident Evil 6 doesn't have the best reputation in the series, does it? From the moment this game had its gameplay shown off at E3 2012, the reception has been mediocre at best and with good reason. From its ridiculous and convoluted story even for Resident Evil standards, to its downgrade in graphics and gameplay mechanics that weren't evolving much since their introduction in 4, and its fear to stick to one style genre was heavily criticized. 6 was a game that tried to please everyone, but ended up doing the opposite and leaving a bad taste in just about everyone's mouth. This was clearly shown in its attempt to include 4 different campaign scenarios with each having a different style or theme. It didn't pan out well, and Resident Evil 6 is for many a perfect case study on how trying to pander to all crowds will backfire badly in most cases. Of course, this was also during a time where Capcom was at their most greedy and arrogant as a developer. This was at that time where they wanted to pump out a Resident Evil game every year and didn't seem to care about quality control or polish for most titles. Hell, Resident Evil 6 was released 1.5 months before the original launch date they had. That's definitely a red flag right there, but hey, maybe they just got done quicker than they thought. Yeah, right, considering the game needed a couple patches even before the DLC released to make it more playable? Yeah, kind of a rush job. In the end, this was a time where Capcom had it in their heads. It's got Resident Evil on the cover, it'll sell millions based on name alone. Well, if Resident Evil 7 is anything to go by, that thought process didn't pan out for him, as not only is 6 considered the worst in the main series, but its sales projections were cut nearly in half and received a price cut pretty damn quickly after release. To say Resident Evil 6 was an embarrassment for Capcom would be kind of an understatement. So despite all these negative aspects about this game, why is it I still find some enjoyment out of it, and not in a so bad it's good way either? Well, I think it's 2 things. First off, 6 feels a lot more complete than it did back in 2012. This is something I forget about, but another reason why this game felt like such a step back from other games was due to how bare bones it was at launch. It was the 4 main campaigns, Agent Hunt, which honestly was such a boring mode that I think I only touched it 2 or 3 times, and then there was Mercenaries, which hey, I love mercs! Well, that too was bare bones at launch. Only 3 stages were playable, 4 if you got a code for one as a pre-order bonus, and then the costumes were crap and you didn't even get access to all the retro ones for a few months. It was unbelievable just how little there was to the base game. Didn't have to pay for all the extras months later. It wasn't helping anything at all. Nowadays though, you get everything in one package on the PS4 and Xbox One remasters, and to be fair, the extra modes and stages are pretty fun, with the Catacombs level being one of my favorite stages in all Resident Evil bonus modes. I didn't really care for this game's version of Survivors since it felt like a gimped version of Operation Raccoon City's Heroes mode, and to have a mode from that game upstage you, that's pretty bad. But oh, I loved Predator and Onslaught mode. To me, there's potential with these modes. Predator was basically an early version of the Friday the 13th game that came out last year, just with more focus on killing Usenek instead of surviving him. Granted, it's not balanced that well anymore, and people know how to exploit the hell out of this big fucker so it can barely do anything, but I do hope a revised version of it comes back one day. Just this time include extra b.o.w's next time like Tyrant or Nemesis. Oh man, Nemesis would have been awesome! As for Onslaught mode, honestly, I think this is the best way to turn Mercenaries into a competitive mode. Instead of high scores, your focus is to survive and overwhelm your opponent by killing and sending creatures to his or her map. It was fast, hectic, chaotic, and a lot of fun. The only negative for it really was that it was limited to 2 players. If they could bump it up to 4 or even 8 players in a future version, that would be amazing. But bonus modes aside, the other reason why I'm able to enjoy this game for what it is nowadays is because, well, there were aspects about even the base game that I did enjoy. First off was the amount of freedom and control you had over your character. This updated mechanic for Resident Evil 6 was one of the scarce upgrades to gameplay it did get. I mean, sure, if this was a survival horror game, then this would have been a detriment to the game due to how aggressive and actiony your character can get. But as much as Leon's campaign wanted to beat it into your head that this game was more about horror than action, the reality is, 6 cared much more about the action crowd than it did its survival horror fans. This is why I'm probably one of the rare few who will say Chris's campaign was the best one in Resident Evil 6. Most people will say Leon's was the most tolerable due to it being the closest to horror, with it being a bit slower paced in some of its chapters, and you know what, fair enough of a valid point. But I'd argue the controls and mechanics of this game were made for an action experience. And what was Chris's campaign all about? That action. It's pretty much why when I do return to story mode, I usually go back to Chris's. It's just the easiest to go back to in my opinion. Plus, Chaos was a pretty awesome looking final boss. A hell of a lot better than Derek or Usenek if you ask me. The other mechanic they introduced was the meetup sections where you could possibly cross paths with another player online. Basically what happens is 2 random people who are playing on separate campaigns could possibly join up for certain segments and work together to complete a task, and once it's over they'll part ways and continue on their separate campaigns. This to me was a really interesting idea, and I think it could be expanded a lot more than just being regulated to mostly boss fights. It could also help fix the co-op problem some people seem to have where they want to keep it a single-player experience for the more horror-centric entries. And incorporating this idea could still keep those co-op moments in the game without having to force a second character with you at all times. I don't know, I think it has potential if it's done right. But I'm gonna end this now. Any longer, it ain't gonna be a mini-review anymore. So, can I recommend this game? Well, to be honest, I kinda can nowadays. You guys watching this probably think I'm crazy or a Resident Evil fanboy, but just hear me out. I only recommend the PS4 or Xbox One remasters. You're getting the complete and updated package, and even now buying a new costs fuck all, so even if you don't like it, it's not like you got burned much. And as I mentioned, there are some redeeming elements about Resident Evil 6 now that has been optimized to its fullest potential. It's still not a really good game, but it's not as bad as people make it out to be anymore, and there's some enjoyment to be had, especially if you have someone to play it with. So I give it a really, and I mean really cautious recommendation if you have a high tolerance to mediocrity like I seem to have. But in the end, I'd say it's good for some mindless action.